Welcome to the CEC Report. This is the weekly analysis of politics and the economy presented by the Citizens Electoral Council of Australia, to be broadcast on Channel 31 and webcast over the internet. I'm Robert Barwick. I'm joined every week by CEC founder and leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks, Robbie.
Okay, so for today's weekly report of November 11, 2011, we have three items. One, the British want world war because their policy is genocide. Two, Europe now officially a banker's dictatorship. And three, the great Aussie superannuation sting. So first, the British want world war because their policy is genocide. We are now in a countdown to World War III, a nuclear World War III, that would be triggered by an impending attack on Iran. This week, the International Atomic Energy Agency released a report alleging that Iran, like Iraq a decade ago, has an intention for building weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons of mass destruction. This report, in anticipation of it, has been regarded by especially the Israelis and their neocon supporters in America and Britain as a green light for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to order a rogue strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, a preemptive strike. Now, just to be clear, when you see these news reports about such things as the IAEA report, you think, well, this must be a serious report. This is a formal body. This is its job. It's set up to do these things. It's all smoke and mirrors. The so-called evidence in the report is not the IAEA's independent findings. It's what the British, the French, the Americans and the Israelis have included in the report because they're all contributing members of the IAEA. So it's their so-called evidence that gets classified as IAEA evidence. The evidence is just a total rehash of the same garbage we got in the lead up to the Iraq War, grainy satellite photos of so-called nuclear installations that, remember with Iraq, turned out to be nothing. If the Israelis go ahead with a strike, the jet fighters they would send to Iran would fly over Syria. They would also bomb nuclear installations in Syria on the way. The thing is, the nuclear installations in Syria are run by the Russians, so this would be an attack on Russia. Russia and China are stridently opposed to an attack on Iran. More than that, Russia and China are the leaders of a strategic cooperation organisation known as the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation, which is becoming a strategic bloc in Asia. At its last meeting this week, Pakistan, Iran and India were all present, and they've all asked to become full members of this Shanghai Cooperation Organisation. So that puts them in a strategic alliance with Russia and China. An attack on Iran triggers that, and the people pushing the attack know that's the case. So if the neocon nutcases who have been let out of their cage under Obama succeed, a global showdown will ensue. The bottom line is, war in this case is a clear and present danger because the people on the British side want it. War is their policy. To make a comparison, or in this case a contrast, the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 1960s was only averted because JFK didn't want a war. Go and look at the movie 13 Days for a flavour of that, but it's true, he didn't want a war. In this case, the British want a war. Craig, permanent war has been British imperial policy for centuries. Why?
Well, Robbie, what's at stake here is a principle, and it's what we talk about a lot within our material. It's called the oligarchical principle. This is a view that there is a certain handful of individuals who believe that they are the equivalent of the gods of Olympus, that they have the absolute control of the destiny of mankind. And that means that they view human beings as human cattle. Cattle to be culled. If there's too many people, you've got to get rid of people. But more importantly, the oligarchical principle also demands that science and technology be eliminated from human development. And that's really the key here, because look, it's British imperial policy. Why? It's because the British Empire is the continuation of, at least, well, it's the fourth empire of a continuing series of empires. The first was the Roman Empire, and people can remember the horrendous treatment of the Christians and the others in the arena. You know, this was Nero, this was Caligula, this was horrible stuff. This was an expression of the oligarchical principle at that point. Then you had the Byzantine Empire. Then you had the Crusades, which were actually run by the Venetians, funded by the Venetians, the sacking of Constantinople and those sorts of empire activities. Well, there was the British Empire came out of that because of a collaboration between the British and the Dutch empires at that particular, the point of about the 18th century. So you had a combining of the British and the Dutch monarchies actually to form the British Empire. The principle, however, is this oligarchical principle.
The oligarchical principle despises human progress.
Yes.
And a surefire way to stop human progress in its tracks is unleash war.
And that's right, because what you have now is a disintegrating European transatlantic system,
monetary system,
as we see with the problems with Italy, with the problems with Greece. But we have on the other side, we have a promotion of the need for technology by China, by Russia. So the British Empire, the British monetary system is running this global system, isn't going to allow Russia and China to become into a position of power as the British monetary system collapses. So what happens is that you get the enforcement of this oligarchical principle. And thermonuclear war, to reduce the world's population down to below 1 billion, is very much a modus operandi of the British. They will do it, and that's why it's extremely worrying. You've got to remember, Robbie, coming out of World War II, again, the British monarchy, under Prince Philip in particular, and the Dutch monarchy joined under Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who was an out-and-out member of the Nazi Party, to create the World Wildlife Fund. And the WWF, this green horror show that's dominated the world ever since, has a stated policy of reducing the world's population down to below 2 billion people. And recently that was even enhanced by Hans Schellenhuber to reduce the world's population down to below 1 billion people. Of course, Schellenhuber was effectively knighted by the Queen for his work in this area. So this is a horrendous situation, very, very dangerous. Mr. LaRouche is very specific about it and has a lot more to say on his website.
And it so happens, Craig, today is November 11th, Remembrance Day. And one of the things Australians should remember, of course, is we celebrate or we commemorate our role in World War I, where we were cannon fodder for the British. And if you go look at the story of Gallipoli especially, and the number of casualties there, the reason why is because Churchill pursued a policy, a reckless policy, where in his mind the casualties didn't matter. And Churchill actually said there's nothing people could aspire to more than to die for the British Empire. EIR has a book by Graham Lowry called How the Nation Was Won, which goes through the history of how the Venetians took over Britain and established the British Empire, where Churchill's ancestor, Lord Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, English patriots like Hunter and Jonathan Swift opposed him because he was pursuing then a policy of permanent war in Europe against France, etc. But it personified the British policy of permanent war. And that policy still is how the British think to this day.
Yeah, I don't think really, we go through a lot of this material in our one of our previous papers published in 2009 on Defeat the British Empire of Monetarism, where we lay out the history of the British Empire and really make it very clear to people that this is not something that can't be understood by just the ordinary folk, that the British Empire is actually the mortal enemy of humanity, and they intend to bring on World War III as a thermonuclear war, which is very, very worrying.
Okay, we'll leave it there. When we come back, we're going to discuss the events in Europe this week and how it has officially become a banker's dictatorship. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Now to our second item, Europe now officially a banker's dictatorship. So as of today, the former Vice President of the European Central Bank has been installed as the new Prime Minister of Greece, displacing Papandreou. This follows a dramatic week, which we discussed last week, where Papandreou had announced that he would hold a referendum on the European bailout, and all hell broke loose. In this week, we have seen all pretenses to democracy and sovereignty in Europe drop, and all the fascists have emerged from the woodwork and put on their armbands. When Papandreou tried to hold a referendum, the Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, made an extraordinary statement that Greece no longer has the right to make those decisions. I'll just read you that quote. What we got in Cannes at the G20 summit, where Julia Gillard was one of them, was the feeling that there is no such thing any longer as domestic policy making, Merkel said. Quote, domestic is what's inside the currency area. Greece can no longer decide all by itself the issue of whether it should hold a referendum or not. The decision in Greece had ramifications for all of us because the reliability of decisions taken by the 17 members of the Eurozone was suddenly endangered. All of the other 16 were just as affected by this referendum decision.
This is a quote. This is a British monetarist empire.
This
defined
Eurozone,
purely by currency.
Yes, we're going to create a currency and no democratic right will get in the way of it. Now, an historical note here. People know about the fascism in Europe that led to World War II. What most people probably don't know is that fascism started off as a banker's dream in the 1920s of what was called a pan-European Union. And it was led by aristocrats such as Count Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi and Adolf Hitler's eventual finance minister, Hjalmar Schacht. And you can read about that history in this Cynici paper. Craig, it looks like the Pan-European Union has been reborn in this Eurozone.
This history is repeating itself. Like in 1922, the Count brought together 6,000 oligarchs, representatives of the oligarchy, with the specific task of destroying the national sovereignty of those states in that particular area. That's now happened. So this is not a new idea. And this leads into the whole concept of a monetarist empire. As I said before, this is currency based. This has got nothing to do with the well-being of the individuals. This has got nothing to do with the development of the nation state. In fact, it's completely the opposite. This is an oligarchical control mechanism to destroy the populations in those areas. So, I mean...
The currency dictates to the people, not the other way around.
And what's the currency? What's the money? Right? Money is only ever a means in order to facilitation of the development of an economy. That's what it should be. However, it's now used as a weapon to destroy the very lives of the people inside countries, what should be sovereign countries. And this is, Hjalmar Schacht, for example, Hitler's finance minister. He was one of the key operatives in this entire approach. He is the guy that there was a debate, a very famous debate between Lyndon LaRouche and an economist by the name of Abba Lerner, right? And Abba Lerner bemoaned the fact that if Schacht's policies were adopted, then, the sorts of policies we had today wouldn't be necessary.
Well, he said if Schacht had been listened to by the German people, Hitler would not have been necessary.
That's what I mean. Yeah, Hitler.
So, fascism...
the policies today are very much Hitler-like anyway.
Fascism and bankers... Fascist and banker are obviously, those words are synonyms. Let me just, in the time I've got left quickly, when Merkel said about the G20 that at that summit there was the feeling there is no such thing any longer as domestic policy making, obviously Julia Gillard would have agreed with that.
Wow, that's what, as a Fabian socialist, you'd totally agree with that, that she's prepared to bow down to the higher powers in order to destroy our sovereignty. You only have to look at the carbon tax.
Carbon tax, exactly. That's what we've got here. All right, so again, I urge people, if you haven't read this paper, you can order it from the CEC. This gives you the history of what actual fascism is. So when we come back, we have an explosive report on a huge scandal the great Aussie superannuation sting. Welcome back. Let's now talk about the great Australian superannuation sting. So we've just put out a press release today, which by the time you're watching this you might have seen, which exposes what some of you watching may have already figured out. Superannuation is a scam. You are now losing your super on the landslide in the world financial markets because you were meant to. It was never ever designed to fund your retirement, but it was invented to feed a growing slime mould of financial parasites that are looting Australia and the world, led by none other than Macquarie Bank. Now this is an enormous scandal, partly because for 2 decades workers, blue-collar workers, have been conned by their own side, by the Labor Party, who they think represents them, and by their unions. Now, some of the details I'm going to give you come out of this book called Unfinished Business, Paul Keating's Interrupted Revolution by David Love. This book is not an expose. David Love is a groupie of Paul Keating. He worships him. He's talking about what he thinks is a great thing. But the bottom line is that Paul Keating and Macquarie Bank cooked up the idea of compulsorily extracting money from workers' bank accounts to put into superannuation accounts to feed Macquarie Bank and similar speculative banks as they went around the world doing their financial looting. I'm going to read you a couple of quotes on that. David Love said that Paul Keating pushed compulsory super because, quote, unless the growth in savings and therefore in financial capital continued to accelerate, Macquarie and institutions like it could not manage to sustain the momentum of the growth in their overseas operations. And Keating wanted these as a new Australian industry. Now, it's a particularly sick use of the term industry because you're not talking about anything that produces anything, you're talking about financial parasites. And I'll give you another flavour of that. I'm going to read the last 2 quotes of David Love's book, last 2 paragraphs. This is how he concludes. We stand now at a point of incomplete revolution. Nothing is more indicative of this than the approximately 60,000 young people, less the 300 to 400 accepted, who apply unsuccessfully each year for jobs at the Macquarie Group. These are the basis for an Antipodean Venice. I'll explain that in a second. This would extend the remarkable blossoming of Australia's capacity to manage the world's investment funds, in combination with a demonstrated ability to successfully invest funds across the world in toll roads, airports, power utilities, water utilities, bridges across the Great Rivers, skyways, skyscrapers, tunnels through the world's mountains, and wind farms across its plains. To complete the revolution, we need a federal budget-led move to an industrial pension system rising from 9% of incomes to 15%. We need the Rudd government to progressively complete this task through the course of the next 2.5 years. So this book was written in 2008, just when the global financial crisis erupted. So think about what they talk about with Macquarie Bank and its type of business being an industry. This is an industry that extracts funds and uses them to invest in those things, sure, but for the profit of shareholders of Macquarie Bank, not for the service they provide. And this is the model that Australians have been hammered with in the last decade or more with, especially toll roads and the privatisation of everything that Macquarie Bank has been at the heart of. Every reform that has happened in Australia, economic reform from the late 70s onward, Macquarie Bank has directed. And Macquarie Bank is the City of London. It used to be known as Hill Samuel. Hill Samuel is a very powerful London bank that represented the highest echelons of British intelligence. And its outfit in Australia was Macquarie, which directed the dismantling of Australia's productive economy. So Australia became totally exposed to the kind of financial looting that the British Empire is based upon. That's Macquarie Bank. And you'll see in the press release all the details of that. it's very important to note that in 2008, Macquarie Bank would have collapsed if it wasn't able to use its enormous influence among governments, because it employs a bunch of former politicians, to get the Rudd government to bail it out. And there was a flurry of emails and phone calls behind the scenes in 2008, which is what made Wayne Swan announce the bank loan guarantee that happened at the same time as the deposit guarantee. So read our press release on it and read the book yourself if you like. Two things. I want to make a comment about his reference of an Antipodes in Venice, because it's rather explicit. And you can comment on this yourself in a sec, Craig, but this is the idea that Australia should become like what the British Empire was, or the Venetian Empire, which is nothing, something that it does not produce any wealth, but uses funds to have a monetary imperial system to loot the world, right? And they're explicit on that, and we expose Venice more than anybody. So Craig, comment on that, and also, I want you to also, in the time I've got left, people fall for the kind of con that is superannuation because they don't understand how an economy should function, right? They're told, oh, you invest your money and you make lots of returns, etc. How would a proper economy and retirement system actually function?
Well, it's all dependent on the state of your physical economy, Robbie, not this monetarism stuff that we're talking about with the Venetian monetary system, which is, of course, the British monetary system that we've referred to a lot. I think the best example to give people a very clear sense of this is to look at what Mr. LaRouche invented as a device in 1994 to help the layperson understand what's going on. And if you have a look at what he called, or what he termed, a triple curve function, what you have today is a very sick so-called economy. There's three lines or three curves involved in this. The first is the financial aggregates curve, which is made up of the financial instruments that are necessary to fund an economy. The second is the monetary aggregates. Now, this is the money that's literally being hyperinflated at the moment, being printed and pumped into the economy in order to fund the financial aggregates. And this is what's happening in Germany right now, where you're getting literally trillions of dollars being printed to try and bail out the European countries. You know, $21 trillion being printed in monetary aggregates to fund the financial aggregates that are in these banks that are being speculating in derivatives. But the important thing is, and this is what Macquarie Bank is involved in, this sort of speculation. What you see, however, is the collapse of the physical economy. We're not building enough infrastructure, keeping the roads in good stead. We're not building high-speed rail systems. We don't have a space industry. You know, we're not spending enough in education, of the types of education to develop an educated citizenry. So our physical economy, which is the bottom curve, is going through the floor, whereas the other curves are going through the roof, and they've gone into what's called an exponential rate of growth. This is an economy which is actually collapsing. It's not actually growing. If you look at Mr. LaRouche's what we call dual curve, then you see a much healthier economy, where the top curve is actually the physical economy. And you notice that there's only two curves here, not three, because the monetary system, the monetarist process of printing money, doesn't exist. It's completely controlled, regulated by governments in order to simply provide the necessary funds to provide for financial aggregates.
Through national banking, the things that fund physical activity.
That's right. And that's why, in order to deal with the global situation in Germany, in Europe right now, in Greece and other places, you have to eliminate the entire speculative system, go back to a Glass-Steagall method of running the financial economy.
All right, okay, that's all we've got time for today. Thanks for tuning in, and tune in each week for the CEC Report.